Hi parents, this is Pastor Anthony again with our last day of On the Trail VBS Parents Edition. Today we're going to be uncovering a very interesting story after the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. He comes up to Galilee and appears on the seashore while the men are on their boat fishing again. Peter and some of the other disciples are still waiting for further instruction. As Christ says, I'll go to Galilee and await further instruction. And while they're up there, they start doing their business, which is fishing. And so they're out there fishing. They're not really catching anything. And then Jesus appears and he says, hey, cast your nets on the other side of the boat. They immediately recognize who this is. This appears in John chapter 21. Verse 4, just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet the disciples did not know it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? And they said, no. And he said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you'll find some. So they cast it, and they were not able to haul it in because of the amount of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved, so that's code in the Gospel of John. Whenever you see that, that's John himself. Therefore said to Peter, it is the Lord. Remember, like the first thing he did when he called us. So when Simon Peter heard it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work. He threw himself into the sea, and the other disciples came in on the boat. He couldn't wait. He just wanted to get there. He goes, and Jesus says, hey, come sit down and have some breakfast with me, right? Because the dawn broke. And then we have this odd interaction that takes place between Peter and Jesus. And it says here in verse 15, when they finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Are you devoted to me more than even these men that you've called brothers, these men you've known before even me, these men that you fished with and suffered with and loved with and fought with, do you love these men more than me? And what he's really asking here is, who are you devoted to? Are you devoted to God? Because what that takes is everything. And so he said to him, Peter, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said, feed my lambs. And then Jesus said to him the second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus said, tend to my sheep. And Jesus said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? I'll think about this 3 times. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And you're starting to think, man, this guy doesn't believe me. Or maybe you're starting thinking, man, do I love you? Am I even answering this question right? So Peter was grieved, because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. What's going on? Why the 3 times? Why any of this is taking place? Well, earlier on in the Gospel of John, during the Last Supper, Jesus indicates that one of them will betray them that night. Peter is furious with this, and he says, we would never do this. Tell us who he is, and we'll find him. And then Jesus, instead of turning to Judas, turns to Peter. And he says, Peter, this very night, you're going to betray me 3 times. The truth is, all the disciples eventually, and in one way or another, betrayed him. They abandoned him. When he was arrested, they ran away, they hid. John was the only one showing up every now and then at these trials, but even then, he was always on the background. But while John is following them, we know that Peter is following John. John has access for some reason. Maybe he knows someone in there, maybe a family member is part of the priesthood or has an in with the council. And so John makes his way into some of the proceedings, but Peter doesn't. He has to stay outside. And while he's outside, he's confronted 3 times. They say, hey, I know you. You're that guy who follows Jesus around all the time. And Peter says, no. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not that guy. I'm not that guy. He doesn't want to get in trouble. He's very fearful for his life. Again, someone comes up to him and says, hey, aren't you one of those guys that follows Jesus around? Now, Jesus is in the middle of being accused of heresy, accused of all kinds of things, being brought before, being beaten up at this moment. So Peter, afraid for his very life, goes, no, I don't know who you're talking about. I'm not that guy. I don't know that guy. And for the 3rd time, a little girl confronts me and says, aren't you that guy? And it's hard to convey this in English, and even the Bible doesn't convey the spirit of Peter in that moment, but the language is strong, and the language is rude, to say the least, and terrible. and it's the equivalent of very harsh words, and he says, I don't know that guy. I have nothing to do with him. And it's in that moment that the rooster crows and Peter realizes all that pomp, all that I will never betray you, I love you forever, will stop anybody, comes to a head, and he realizes he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. When it came for the rubber to meet the road, when it came for him to stand up for what was right, he couldn't do it. And he had betrayed his master, not just once, like Judas, but 3 times over. And so he runs weeping away. So we consider these 2 men, these 2 specific men, that on that night Jesus knew would betray them especially. Judas obviously selling him out for 30 pieces of silver, and Peter denying him 3 times when it came time to stand with him and for him. Now, these 2 men approach this scenario differently in seeking a solution. Judas tries to pay for it and redeem himself. He goes before the Pharisees, he takes the coin, he says, take this money back, it's blood money. And they say, hey man, that's your money, right? That's your guilt, that's your conscience, that's your problem. And so what he does is he takes those pieces of silver, and once again, still trying to redeem himself, takes it and tosses it on the floor and leaves. What he does then is harsh and difficult. And if a child is watching, I don't want to really get into it, but he does try to take his own life. It fails in a terrible way, and eventually he does die. But we see here what the problem was, right? He was guilty, he was shamed, he was regretful, and he tried to redeem himself. He tried to give the money back, but it was too late. The sin had been committed. The wrong had already happened. The betrayal occurred. Now, Peter's an interesting story. Peter doesn't try to pay for it. Peter, in his guilt and his shame, we don't know specifically, but seems to process it and possibly even ask God for forgiveness. He weeps. Doesn't get angry at himself necessarily, but weeps over his condition and what he knew to be his failure. But he doesn't live in that shame, and he doesn't try to buy it back or redeem himself. What is happening here in this instant that we see in John chapter 21 is Jesus demonstrating his forgiveness of Peter. Peter 3 times betrayed. And Jesus is offering Peter clearly, in a very real way, that forgiveness that he didn't even necessarily know at this point that he really longed for. And so 3 times he betrayed him, and 3 times he confesses him, I love you, I love you, I love you. And Jesus isn't hateful here or angry. Jesus isn't accusing him, you let me to die, you think on that while I forgive you. No. Jesus forgives him. And he allows in this moment when Peter comes to him an opportunity for Peter even to receive that forgiveness and to live in it. Not guilt, not regret, not shame, not sorrow, not trying to pay his own way, but be forgiven. And then out of that forgiveness, Jesus tells him, feed my sheep. Now consider this. If Jesus had told him to feed his sheep first and then forgave him, it would be obligatory. If you do this, then I'll forgive you. But that's not the way Jesus works. There's no earning of salvation. There's no buying back your sin. There's no paying for what we have done. It's been done. It's been completed. You can't just give it back. Judas learned that. But Jesus doesn't ask us to pay it back. He pays for it. Like we talked about on the very first day, Jesus reveals the entire plan to Nicodemus. God sent his Son into the world to die that we may live. And Jesus came and he died. And he took the sins of all his people upon him that we may live. Jesus offers us forgiveness. Not half forgiveness, not forgiveness with conditions, not I'll forgive you if you do this, or if you forgive, none of that. If you say you're sorry, none of that. He offers us a complete and total forgiveness, and an immense love flows from the beginning to the end of that. We've all done wrong things. Maybe things we don't think we can be forgiven for. Maybe things that we think were too far and too much. And too deep a betrayal of God and his creation. But we see here, even with Peter, in a direct betrayal of Jesus Christ 3 times over, that the forgiveness of Christ covers that. Don't be limited in your efficiency and work for Christ by your guilt. Don't be stopped by shame, and don't live in regret. You've been set free from sin. Christ has forgiven you if you have asked for it. And if you are His, and He is yours, then walk with Him. Don't be ashamed. Don't be worried. Don't be regretful. Live in the new life that He has given you. I hope you enjoyed this week. I hope you enjoyed sharing some of these things even with your children. And I pray that God might bless you and yours. Thank you for joining us.